welcome once again to Tom's Hit Parade. As you can tell from the substitute intro music, I've got a little something different for you today. Well, hopefully I'm giving you something a little bit different with every episode. I wouldn't want you to subscribe and tune in if I'm shoveling the same old crap every week. But anyway, this is the first installment of an occasional feature that I call Discography. Basically, it's an intro to and an overview of one of my favorite artists. I guess you could say it's a poor man's VH1 Behind the Music. So anyway, the artist that I'm talking about today is a rock band called 11. Now, I basically just stumbled upon these guys. It was back in the early 90s when I first really started exploring music. I just got my first CD player, and I was in my first paying job, and so most of my paychecks were just going to the local record stores, going and just buying CDs, sight unseen, or in this case I guess sound unheard. Just kind of putting my feelers out, looking at the album covers that kind of spoke to me. And because remember, back in the early 90s, there were no sound clips on the internet to look at. There really wasn't an internet in those days. And there were 2 or 3 stores within walking distance of my house back then, but none of them had listening stations of any sort. So, but yeah, this was just one of those lucky rolls of the dice that I ended up really enjoying ever since then, and just never stopped enjoying. So anyway, 11 was a rock band from Los Angeles that had a nice thick guitar sound reminiscent of Led Zeppelin, and a really stout beat sensibility, a nice strong beat, not unlike The Who or Van Halen, maybe ZZ Top or Bachman Turner Overdrive, sort of. And not the least of which, also 2 of the most distinctive voices I've ever heard in rock music. Now, 11 is pretty much at the upper end of how loud or how heavy I like my music in terms of hard rock or heavy metal. These guys aren't heavy metal, but you know what I'm saying. So if they were any other band, I probably would have dismissed them and not given them another chance. But there was just something about 11 that made them more than the sum of their parts, really. So 2 of 11's core members, a guitarist and vocalist by the name of Alan Johannes and a drummer named Jack Irons, they got their start as teenagers in an early version of a band that would eventually become the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, Johannes left the band before they adopted the Chili Peppers name, and he met up with a vocalist-keyboardist named Natasha Schneider. And the 2 of them released a self-titled album in 1987 on MCA Records under the name Walk the Moon. Now, being from the 80s, this was much more of a synth-heavy album than anything that 11 would go on to record, but it was still a decent album. And curiously, although I've been a fan of 11 since like 1991, I somehow did not find out about this early project of theirs until 6 or 7 years ago. And as a side note, I had listened to the debut album by the band that we know today as Walk the Moon, the much more famous band, and I didn't care for it much. But then when I found out about this Walk the Moon, I decided that was a signal from the universe that I should give the much more better known contemporary Walk the Moon another try, and I've been a fan of theirs ever since. So Irons left the Chili Peppers before they released Mother's Milk, and he joined up with Johannes and Schneider, and 11 was born. They released their debut album called Awake in a Dream in 1991 on the Morgan Creek label.
You are mine. I'm taking you in. You are mine. On a night ride. You are mine. I'll show you the view. You are mine. From the inside. You are mine. I'm taking you in. You are mine. On a night ride. You are mine. I'll show you the view. You are mine. From the inside.
Now, I guess the first thing that really caught me about these guys was that, first of all, their nice, strong, heavy beat to most of their songs. And also how in most of their songs the guitars seem to sing right along with their vocals, following the same melody. And also, of course, like I said, those extremely distinctive voices of Alan Johannes and Natasha Schneider. And that was one of the things that doesn't quite sit well, I guess, with me with regard to their earlier project, Walk the Moon, is their voices are much more suited to rock instrumentation than to the synth kind of stuff. It'd kind of be like Annie Lennox fronting a straight-ahead rock band. It's just, they wouldn't mesh. Now, 11 switched labels to Hollywood Records for their self-titled sophomore album, released 2 years later. Now, this one had a heavier sound than their debut album, and it took me a while to get used to it, but I eventually came to appreciate it, especially in terms of how it fits into the rest of their discography. It's just very much them. What can I say?
Say love, say might. Say dark, say night. I won't die without a fight. Say dark, say sight. Say God, say light. Say yes, alright.
Good album, and some good song title. That's one thing that these guys have a penchant for, is good song titles. Track 5, if you can see it here, Let Down, Left Out, Laughed At. It's great song titles. Now, 11's third album, called Funk, arrived in 1995. It's probably my least favorite album of theirs, even though, there's still plenty of good songs on it. But it does have one of my favorite songs of theirs, called Awful Lot. Now, before this album was finished, Jack Irons left the band to drum for a while for Pearl Jam, and it would be 11's last album for 5 years. Now, a gentleman named Greg Upchurch would take over drumming duties with 11 for their fourth album, which they released in the year 2000 on A&M Records. And now, if there were a Grammy Award for Album Title of the Year, these guys would have walked away with it this year. Avant-Garde Dog. Good song titles, good album titles. That's a band I can appreciate. I don't know if they deliberately referenced this with the album title or not, but they seem to incorporate some more electronic elements than in previous albums. Not overwhelmingly so, but you can tell there are just some little touches, little flourishes of electronics. Usually compensating for the drums. I certainly doubt that Greg Upchurch is a weak drummer by any sense of the words. I guess that's just a direction they decided to go with the album.
Cool, baby, rock me up like a spider. You lift me like the 4th of July. Cool, baby, rock me up like a spider. And lift me like the 4th of July.
Now, also during 11's hiatus before Avant-Garde Dog, Johannes and Schneider made some significant instrumental and songwriting and production contributions to the Queens of the Stone Age's album Lullabies to Paralyze, and also Chris Cornell's Euphoria Morning, amongst others, and they also served as touring performers for those bands. Now, by the time 11 returned to the studio for their fifth album, Jack Irons had rejoined the band. The album, called Howling Book, was recorded and produced entirely by the band themselves, and it was released on their own label, Pollen Records. This was yet another fine effort by 11, but it would ultimately prove to be their last album. After a long fight with cancer, Natasha Schneider passed away in 2008. 11 had reportedly been working on a sixth album at the time, but as far as I know, no recordings were ever released from any sessions that might have taken place. And in my opinion, it's just as well that the band is basically dormant, because I simply cannot imagine them without Natasha's brassy, leathery voice. It was just so much a part of the group. Now, I'd like to think that someday maybe we'll see a greatest hits compilation, or possibly even reissues of their albums, but I'm honestly not holding my breath, and it's not just because of their completely unjustified obscurity, but it's also also because of the fact that they were on 4 different labels during their 5-album recording career. So yeah, that makes it a pretty remote possibility that we'll ever see any reissues from them. So yeah, that basically sums up the career of 11, one of my favorite rock bands of all time. So yeah, my favorite album is of theirs is Awake in a Dream, pretty much. And my second favorite, I would have to say my second favorite is Avant-Garde Dog. Although, I mean, all 5 of them are worth listening to, definitely. Now, I'm going to have a playlist linked to in my description down below of basically my version of a greatest hits album of theirs that I made myself. The videos had been posted by a fellow YouTuber who has, I believe, all of their songs from all their albums up available on YouTube if you want to listen to them in even more depth. So anyway, thank you very much for watching this episode. I hope I clued you into a great band that you hadn't heard of before. Questions, comments, fire them away, and like, subscribe, share, comment, and thank you very much again for watching, and remember, life's too short to be a music snob.